think we can start while they fix the streaming and the connection issue with Carlos Dada, who was not able to come to Santiago. He's in Amsterdam in the AJAV to participate. So we can start, and then when the stream is okay, they're able to connect and they will be able to follow us. With that simultaneous interpret, if you want to hear the panelist in English, you can get your device outside the room. Almost all of them are going to speak in English, and one person is going to speak in Spanish. Thank you very much for coming. No, it's the other way around. No, Salvador.
Muchas gracias a los héroes que vinieron de esa mañana fría del Santiago, de las 9 de la mañana en el sábado. Agradecemos mucho por el esfuerzo y muchas gracias a los panelistas que nos acompañan hoy. Es un honor para nosotros estar con Mauricio. A Mauricio, un gran periodista de investigación chileno, muy conocido en Chile, también el presidente del jurado del premio 2024. Muchas gracias por su presencia. Les voy a presentar con un poco más de detalle antes de sus intervenciones. Ángela Caro, la coordinadora legal de la Fundación para la Libertad de Prensa en Colombia, una gran organización, nuestra aliada en Colombia, que hace un trabajo extraordinario en términos de vigilancia y protección a periodistas. Leopoldo Maldonado, de Artículo 19, de la Oficina Regional de México y Centroamérica, muchas gracias. Y Charlene
Gaio, the founder and director of the Institute Tornapos in Brazil. In line, as I mentioned, here with us we got Carlos Dara, who is the founder and editor of the newspaper El Faro in El Salvador. The reason to this panel is speaking about surveillance and profiling in Latin America is really not just to speak about making denouncements about the big amount of surveillance and abuse from the state apparatus in the region, but also speaking about the efforts of the society and the journalists in the region to look for justice in the face of the national tribunals and the regional tribunals in Latin America. We've got a panel of activists, lawyers, and journalists with a lot of courage. They are in the front line looking for accountability, looking for justice for the journalists, activists who have been victims of profiling and surveillance and monitoring by their own governments. Without further ado, it's almost 9:15. We don't want to extend much more. I wanted to start with you, Mauricio. Mauricio is an investigation journalist, a winner of many international awards for his work of investigation. He's an author, writer, and he was a victim of monitoring, surveillance, and attacks by the army due to his investigation about corruption in the Chilean army. We not normally associate Chile to a country that makes surveillance to the journalists and activists. Can you tell us a little bit, Mauricio, about your experience in those years, about the search of justice and truth? How is your case? How is the decision of looking for justice when you knew that you were an objective of the Chilean authorities? Thank you very much to the all panelists. Can you hear me right? Well, some years ago, I had the chance to lead the investigation about military corruption. This investigation at that time was more complex. We had 850 military officers investigated by the justice and the last 5 commanders-in-chief. Out of those, 4 have been formalized and probably they're going to be that's a very short context. And in that scenario, we had 2 very strange attacks to the magazine that while we were conducting the magazine, they stole the computers, and we were suspicious that there was some kind of a interceptation of computers, telephone interceptions of some kind. But clearly, it's very hard to prove that until the year 2019 in August, one of the agents that was part of the espionage team, for reasons that I don't know and I cannot say, they gave an interview to a journalist in La Tercera newspaper telling about this operation. There will be operation due to my last name. From there, I received anonymously some information, and I'm just going to make a summary, but essentially, we started the investigation and we were able to identify all of the people that were part of this espionage operation. We did it through public transparency. This is very silly because we requested to the Civil Registration Service the emails of those who had requested my background information, and the guys had requested the information from the army officers. Psychologists, military officers were part of that, and with that we were able to establish that there was an operation of follow-up that they had conducted. But afterwards, after the investigation and the prosecutor's office did the information before the trial, initially we thought that they had the order of interceptation had my phone number, but the name of an illegal, irregular immigrant. Yeah. After they discovered that in reality the judge had been part of the operation, the judge went 2 or 3 times to the intelligence head to check how they were able to bypass the law, so to speak, and to be able to do the interceptation in telephone terms legally, but without having my name on it. We were very afraid that if they put my name, someone in the whole operation chain would have let me know. So we're able to the confession. This is basically was told by the intelligence head of the army, and 1 year and a day we were able to achieve something that is very relevant because we never expected this. We never expected. We were to put in jail the intelligence leader of the army and the former judge. It's not a minor thing. I think probably it was the first time we have the case of in Colombia, but in this case we put in jail a judge of the Court of Appeals. So in this study of cases, they were waiting to go into the process, the final process, which is the one, basically the oral part of the trial, where they want to define and get to a conclusion. For a second, I know we are short time, but that's the case. From this case that we can discuss later further, we had the idea of deploying a law to protect the journalists. Okay, so it's very impressive that we're able to achieve the prosecution of 2 high officers. That's normally the problem. If you get to a prosecution, is someone of a lower rank, but talking about an officer of that caliber, of that rank, so congratulations to you and your team and the lawyer. I'm talking about high authorities and the telephone interception that you provided in Chile. I think I'm going to ask now Angela from Colombia. We all know it's a state where journalists and activists, political opponents, have suffered surveillance of different kind for many, many years based on the internal conflict from the DAS and now more recently even the OMP, which is the body in charge of the protection of people at risk. The announcement of follow-up, we have the emblematic we supported that. The cases of Ricardo Calderón, Maria Alejandra Villamizar that you are supporting, those are also, and then when the streaming is in cases and the check follows a stated way, we have simultaneously in how the state is trying to follow, so to make surveillance to the journalists in Colombia. And when they describe the landscape in terms of the profiling of journalists and also the surveillance in telematic terms, personal surveillance, different kinds of surveillance that are still occurring. Of course, that regardless the fibers, that's the issues and the topics in fashion they have not been identified in Colombia. Maybe we can identify those after. Can you give us an initial landscape? Well, in the Foundation for Press Freedom, we have identified from the documentation of cases and investigation that, in fact, the practices of filing and surveillance to journalists are practices that are being recycled. It's a phenomenon that is always there with one idea of, from the state and the journalists, the activists, the human rights defender as an enemy, and so practices that have certain cycles, but they have the central view and they recycle from different entities. When Carlos mentioned this, it was to the security department of the DAS. Then we have some cases inside the National Need of Protection. We have had cases in the prosecutor's office, in the army. So those are practices that are recycled from state structures from entities in different entities inside the state by SCAP that main access. I thought it was very interesting, just like Mauricio mentioned, is how these entities try to bypass the law to see where I am able to use the practices with an apparent legality of these practices. I think the last case that we were able to document, and it's an investigation in what is called the secret folders, which was in a military unit. It is very clear there was a software was being used. It was called Invisible to start generating information and to collect information, public information, and to create files of journalists. When the news was known, and from the Foundation we did the respective announcement, at the time the answer from the state was, this is not an illegal practice, because all of this information is information that is public. I'm collecting that information publicly. I'm not doing any private surveillance. And we spoke up because they were using activities that are destined for intelligence and counterintelligence as a way to show the journalists as enemies. That was information that was public, but the law about intelligence didn't allow the systematic use of that information for the purposes that were being conducted from the states. So that idea of trying to bypass and trying to find an empty space in the norm to continue with these practices, that's a behavior that is repeated in Colombia. And in the face of that, the most concerning thing is the access to justice, because in spite of the fact that internationally, the Inter-American system and the Universal System for Human Rights has established that this type of behaviors should be sanctioned strongly from the state, well, we find where we are in this case of profiling, the prosecutor's office says this is a legal activity, and it has not a sanction on the legal code, because we're not talking about an illegal surveillance or illegal interception. We're talking just a collection of public information which hasn't got any sanction, any penalty. If there is no illegal activity or interceptation, here as a prosecutor, I don't have to investigate. That's one of the biggest difficulties in these new ways to carry out surveillance to journalists. How can we ensure the access to justice in terms of sanctions, in terms of creating new ways to analyzing how this type of practices impact the freedom of speech, and how the state can protect the journalists in the face of these new dynamics where clearly there is an impact to the free expression, and these are practices that create a self-censorship in many cases in the face of journalistic work, which has a lot of impact. There is a big depth, and I would like to believe that this is not only happening in Colombia, but in all of the states of the region, to be able to determine how we can sanction deeply this type of behaviors, and how can we generate greater levels of protections to prevent internet restrictions and transparency and use of this type of devices. And I think that there is also an issue that is prominent, basically how to dissemble the narrative of the press, the media, as an enemy, which is not only related to surveillance or profiling, but other types of attacks motivated from state actors. Thank you. What you mentioned about the enemy of the state makes me think immediately Mexico, because that's why I want to go to Polo, because the activities of surveillance and profiling in secret with the new technologies have increased the possibility, the ways in how the states are trying to stop the investigation, journalism, the public interest. That made me think about Mexico for different reasons. The enemies of the state here in the panel, and also the efforts in legal terms that you are trying to do in Mexico, representing different journalists. If you can tell us a little more about the dynamic of the use of Pegasus, but also the effort that you are doing for justice, that would be interesting too. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invite, and thank you for coming here at this time of the day. And it's a very long story. It's hard to tell this completely because it's got a lot of data too. But since 2015-16, we started working from the documentation, particularly from our colleagues from R3D. Here they are. For the defense of digital rights, and in collaboration with the Citizen Lab of the Toronto University, there was an infrastructure of Pegasus, this aggressive software that was developed by the Israeli company. The infrastructure was operating in Mexico. Then we knew that there were many infrastructures operating. It seemed that they were selling Pegasus, what we call in Mexico the Technology Square, in the historical center, where many agencies of security from the states with and without the chance of intervening the communications that were buying Pegasus. The army started in 2011. We know that year started, and also the prosecutor's office bought it, the National Center for Security, and the Intelligence Center too, CISEN, purchases the federal police also. So Pegasus was there, and then the story became more complex because we realized that also the intermediate elements of NSO in Mexico that were selling to the government, they were also using Pegasus. So in a story that's very complex, which was taken to court eventually, probably the story, the first cases started at the beginning of 2017 with some activists and experts in public health that were pushing the taxes to the drinks. They were being spied by Pegasus. Those were the first cases that were published by R3D. 6 months after the bomb exploded, that case just passed, but we had a huge problem when the journalist Carmen Estegui and the defenders of the mothers and fathers of the Ayotzinapa, with the 43 journalists that were disappeared, activists, anti-corruption that were pushing a reform in that matter, in the basically government of Enrique Peña Nieto, with a lot of corruption and relevant voices from the activism, from journalism, and even political opponents. They have been spied by Pegasus, and the announcements were presented, and the first thing that we found is resistance from the prosecutor's office of the Republic, because they were using Pegasus too. So it's basically going to knock the door of the potential perpetrators, but they have the monopoly of the legal actions. So we had to know the judge. We went to Enemigo with controlled justice because we got some negative our progress to move forward the investigations. They were very aggressive with their own victims when they want to be interrogated because they were questioning what was happening to protect a whole institutional framework from where they were doing espionage. This story continues. Unfortunately, hope of change that we got with our government, which was a political project, a social movement, particularly inspired by Pegasus. We expected some changes, not only in the narratives, but also, let's say, in the practices in terms of justice. That was not the case. We didn't progress, and they also spied, and they spied through the army. That's 100% checked and proved from the recent investigation that were being conducted by R3D, I will say notices in the process of political animal. So it is a space of lies and public debunking, as is called as the morning conference. The big journalist Nigeri Roldan was able to really question the president and to ask him, do you use Pegasus? I really recommend it's a video of March the 10th, 2023, because the president ended up saying that they were not doing espionage, but intelligence. And that was a meme, a joke that was created because we are talking about the lives of the activists and journalists, activists that have documented extra-legal or illegal executions in the Tamaulipas region, activists that investigated the construction of this apparatus. It's a paramilitary apparatus, this cartel of ex-elite military officers. Once again, the journalists of the Pro Center were spied during the Peña Nieto case because of the El Minapa case. And not only that, the New York Times said and the Washington Post that they were also being spied. The Human Rights Subsecretariat, who was investigating the Oxinapa case, and some of the people from his team that were investigating the state repression period. So it's very complex. Probably there's going to be a second round to move forward in terms of the justice access. I'm looking optimism. What happened with Mauricio that gives us hope. But evidently, this is hard. How we have seen this in other areas of the integration process of the democracy. It's not important. These political geometries of the right wing and left wing. A left wing government not only gave a lot of power to the army, but it has justified the espionage against activists and journalists, and also have justified the information that has been hid from the public sphere. It's fascinating what happens in Mexico. I'm not sure if we got Carlos connected, if we are able to him on the screen. I think there is a very important contact between what happened in Mexico and in Salvador in the way of the incredible abuse of Pegasus against journalists and activists, but also the government used that reasoning that they were also spied apparently at some point. There are telephone numbers of public officers that were on the list that was disseminated, but forbidden stories for the Forbidden Stories Consortium to deny that the government was responsible for the hacking, for the espionage to El Faro and the other independent means. I think we don't have Carlos yet. Probably not. Okay, we're going to wait for Carlos to connect later. And while we fix that, I'm going to go with Sharon and Gaio, who's the founder and executive director of the Tornados Institute in Brazil. Institute created recently to support the legal defense of the journalists, and they do a great job in Brazil. Sharon, in Brazil, there is no news about Pegasus. There are news of other types of surveillance. The previous government apparently purchased technology internationally from Israel or other countries to spy the journalists in Brazil and political activists. Can you tell us what's happening in Brazil? What have you found about the previous government? What are the initiatives that the journalism associations, the lawyers are trying to do, to put in place to try to discover what happened in reality?
I think I've been struggling for the past few weeks to which tone should I give to my report on the Brazilian situation, because of course we don't have Pegasus case confirmed in Brazil yet, but vigilance is increasing in Brazil. I think we can say that for sure now. And when you look at the data that Research Institute from Recife published in the end of 2022, I think it's alarming to think that the government spent $100,000 in 2015 buying technology of investigation and surveillance, and this is the amount spent in 2015. When you look at the data from 2021, this amount jumps to $9 million. So this is very alarming, because this means they're investing a lot in intrusive softwares, and we cannot know for sure what kind of technology they're buying, because this institute use information access law in Brazil to obtain this information. And this is like, you can imagine, this is just the tip of the iceberg, because the information released by the government using the law usually is very restricted. Normally you have, this is national security information, this is confidential. So I believe we have much more going on than we can see right now. And as you may all be following, we have in the past government an attempt to buy Pegasus. And I think this was 2021. And we have a very large scandal of misuse of ABIN, that is our intelligence agency in Brazil, that this agency was being used by the Bolsonaro family to persecute political adversaries. And thanks to a publication coming from O Globo, that is one of the largest newspapers in Brazil, we know now that thousands of people were monitored with the use of First Mile. First Mile is a software that allows you to know the location of a person using cell phone endings. So if you have the software, you can know precisely where that person is in that moment. And a list that was leaked to the press had names of ministers of the Supreme Court, politicians, lawyers, and of course journalists. We don't know for sure how many journalists and the precise names, because the investigation is still in course and under secrecy. The name of Glenn Greenwald emerged and a few others, but we don't know for sure the extent of the vigilance against journalists. But moving forward to another piece published recently by Alan de Abreu from PLE regarding spywares, the illegal use of spywares in Brazil. This piece is called No Reino da Arapongagem. It's a very extensive investigation and brings several information about cases of use of intrusive technology, and especially with the use of GI2, that is the surveillance equipment used combined with First Mile. So you have the location of the person and then use the equipment to hear their conversation when you're close. So I would like, Alan brings a lot of cases, but I would like to highlight one because it's the one that interests us more. Is the case of Mato Grosso State, that in 2022 bought this surveillance equipment, GI2, for $1 million. That is a lot in Brazil to spend, right? It's expensive. And the justification was this was being bought to fight fake news. And, and for surprise of no one, a few months ago, a group of journalists that are critical to the governor in that same state were targeted by an operation called Operation Fake News. They're not even creative, right? So we have, I think this is enough for us to be very concerned, because we don't have a history of like this kind of surveillance happening in Brazil. But I would like to bring that we already have some reaction to what's going on. So after a strong reaction from the press and from civil society, the General Prosecution Office in Brazil filed a lawsuit before the Supreme Court seeking for a more specific regulation of how this kind of technology may be used to investigate crimes or under any other justification that you might have. Like if you need a judicial decision before using the equipment, and to seek more control of the use of this technology. And recently, I think 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court called a public hearing that will happen in June. So I think we will have an opportunity for civil society to bring attention to the risks involved in the use of this kind of technology for also surveillance for activists and journalists. And of course, in Brazil, we have this fight between the Congress and the Supreme Court right now that is very famous. And once the Supreme Court start moving in this direction, you already have several bills emerging in the parliament to regulate the use of the technology. Not all of them are good, but this starts to happening already. So what I would like to say is, although we can say that journalism is threatened by surveillance, it's curious to notice that it's exactly the press, the main responsible for bringing light to the subject and fighting the use of this technology along with civil society organizations. And we are having results strong. I think although we have a lot of problems in the past years and because of the last government, I think our democratic institutions are still working. They're not perfect, but having the new General Prosecution Office filing a lawsuit to discuss this in the Supreme Court means something, I guess. You wouldn't see this in the previous administration, because I will even refrain to mention the name of the last General Prosecutor. I might end up sued because he's famous for suing everyone who is critical to him. So I think we have strong journalism in Brazil, and this is preventing this from going further without public discussion regarding this theme. I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Charlene. Está genial tener realmente.
It's great to have a perspective that is more positive, that the institutions are working and they have reacted in one way or another. We have to see what's going to happen, but at least that's also that's always positive. Now we got Carlos Dava. Carlos Dava is the founder and editor of the El Faro. It's an independent mean in Salvador, and they have been targeted from different attacks by the current government, from audits, criminal accusations, and of course the most known is the use of the spyware Pegasus against the whole team of El Faro from a long period of time, from many, many days. Carlos, can you hear me? Can you hear us? What? We still have some problems. That's a shame. Can you hear us? What I wanted to ask you is how you are facing. No, he's not listening. I'm very sorry. I think due to the time, when Carlos is already connected, please let me know, and we can go back to him to talk to him. And for the sake of the time, I'm going to go with the other panelists because I have some questions. Salen, you mentioned that Brazil purchased First Mind and some other kinds of software. They pay $100,000 and $1 million for another type of software. I wanted to ask Angela. You mentioned some 4 years ago, the Harris newspapers in Israel published a piece of news that the Colombian government, the previous government, had purchased Pegasus in Israel, and they would have paid in cash with a plane taking $13 million to Tel Aviv to do the payment in cash, something that is a very impressive piece of news. How the journalist associations have reacted in relation to that piece of news that could indicate that Colombia is using or used software that is so powerful as Pegasus against the social or serious society. Maybe they could be using it now. Because the idea that mentioned Leopold about this goes beyond the line of the government. I think this is very important when we talk about surveillance. We are in a right-wing or left-wing government, democratic or authoritarian. Landscape in the region indicates that irrespective of the political trend, there is monitoring and surveillance. For us as FLIP and some other organizations in Colombia who work with technology topics, this is very alarming, because what we would be investigating another chapter, another cycle of surveillance due to a different use or device, in this case Pegasus. And as Leopoldo mentioned, there is a context when we face this type of cases, especially that's the transparency to the access to the information, because normally this type of purchase of devices can happen in formats that are very irregular, like the one that was denounced, a payment in cash with a plane, $30 million, or purchases where it's not so clear about the use of the resources for the purchase of those devices. So, from the beginning, the documentation and investigation about the purchase of that type of devices is very complex for the organizations who carry out this type of follow-up, because the state has got the whole framework working on hiding the purchase of these devices. And the experience originally has shown that the collaboration between organizations of the civil society with organizations both from other countries and other regions, that's what has allowed it to discover this type of filing practices. And I just wanted to point out something that can be very optimistic for the landscape at the scenario we have. But I do believe that, at least in Colombia, we were able to mark a new way to address this type of topics, at least in terms of transparency for the purchase of this type of equipment and this type of practices. And I believe that if we implement this in the correct way, it can be a reference for the region. And it's related with the case that recently had in the Inter-American Court about the collective of lawyers in Colombia, because the orders of the sentence related with this case that was fighting a surveillance and intelligence from the DAS. They are related specifically with being able to have more warranties about the access to those practices, and also to reform what in Colombia we recognize as the intelligence law and counter-intelligence law around these warranties of not using any resource, but particularly we are interested in the technological resources for this type of surveillance. I mean, I want to be optimistic that this could be a window to move forward in more warranties, but it also could be a reference for the region. Thank you very much, Angela. I go back once again to Paulo and Mauricio very quickly before closing, because the time passes very fast. Paulo, you went to justice the situation in Mexico because of the whistleblower denouncement and the we were able to check that Pegasus had been purchased and was used against journalists. Please tell us about that case in Mexico and the result. I think it's good or bad. Yes, it was good and bad because, in fact, after a long process, as I mentioned, in 2017, the Prosecutor's Office of the Republic, that was still in the formal sector of the executive power, put a series of obstacles. Even we had to really question the authorities. In 2019, a person claimed that was very peculiar. We call it sales, and he started talking about he spoke to the Journalist Association, and then we took him to the authorities that were very reluctant in terms of incorporating the testimony in the first place. He told the stories about these intermediate elements that were selling Pegasus, and they were part of corruption with companies, direct awardings of contracts for video cameras, system security, jammers to block the signals in the jails, etc. And he told us how this person, who is an entrepreneur, Mexican entrepreneur, he used to work for the Mossad, but they say that nobody can be a former officer of Mossad. If you are there, you cannot go out. He sold the software to the Mexican government, also to the different agents, from the orders of the Ministry of Interior, and he was doing espionage by request of the authorities. So I say that this was the complexity of the cases, because you had many agencies from the state formally buying Pegasus, but also the private companies and working with public officers, also spying. This case went to court in 2021, and they arrested the last person of the chain, who was the technical operator of the software in the companies, the person who trained the people with the idea of, with the nice idea of, he was going to speak everything, and he was going to take us to this macro criminal structure that was pointing to the president of the republic. But of course not, because there are big incentives to maintain the silence pact and impunity pact. The person decided not to use any benefit and to face the trial. And he faced the trial, and I would like to mention this, sorry Anna, but she, together with our colleagues, she had to face a very, very complex trial, and it ended up with this result. That it was good and bad. There are a series of complexities there, in technical terms, in procedural terms, forensic terms, those various who go through. Do you remember the Martinelli case in Panama? They just said, I don't have the software, I am not able to know if there is any espionage. The Mexican judge said something very similar, but he ended up saying there was espionage against Carmen due to his investigations, but I cannot prove that this person was part of that. So we've got espionage without spies. Unbelievable. Espionage without spies. Carlos, you're there. How are you? I think now you can hear me. Yes, we've got 2 minutes. I'm very sorry for the technical issues that we had. You can give us a landscape. Can you hear me now? Yes, please. Excuse me?
Hello.
Yeah? I do software.
I'm software. I'm a spy.
See, there's a software here. Yeah, someone intervene on this. We cannot hear Carlos. Impressive. maybe first of all, thank you very much, Mauricio. I would like to thank you as a president of the jury to get to the award. And many colleagues around the world feel that we recognize this award to our colleagues who are having now at this moment the worst situation around the world. In our case, speaking about the interceptions and surveillance, in the case of El Salvador, the government of the President Nayib Bukele has used really, we're not sure if they are still using it, as it was in the other cases, this program is over to follow journalists, to follow the human rights defenders, activists, politicians, critical people. We knew because members of El Caro, they detected Pegasus for a year and a half in use time that were obsessive. We were not the only ones, of course, but as an organization, probably undoubtedly in El Salvador, the organization with the biggest percentage of personnel infected, we did something that was very curious. We crossed the different interception history with our news cycle. There was no news, something new, a surprise, but we were able to confirm that the biggest amount of espionage and people were always around our news that were more complex for the government, in particular corruption cases and the negotiations of the president Bukele with the gangs leaders. As Leopoldo said, this is so secret, the agreements and the purchase of this software, that it's very hard to say directly who is the responsible one in legal terms. But our case, something happened. When Citizen Lab was analyzing the telephone of Carlos Martinez, at that time, the operator came back, the Pegasus operator, and they were able to localize, and Citizen Lab detected that the operator, we confirmed that the operator was in El Salvador. So our case, we have to say that she spied us as state agencies that have their branch in El Salvador. So the deterioration of the democratic institutionality impedes for us having optimism or to have any hope, and that through the respect of our rights, we could be able to detect who are operating this system. With the first institute of the Colombian Institute, we put in place a prosecution's case in California against this company from Israel. After analyzing our arguments and the counter-arguments, the judge determined in first instance that we should present this case in Israel, a country where our opportunities of attaining a real justice and respect to our rights, and particularly information about those contracts, is almost equivalent to putting a lawsuit in El Salvador. The prosecutors have told us, please bring the telephone to analyze them. And we said, no, we're not going to do that because, of course, we want to protect ourselves from you in particular. What we did is to appeal to the sentence, to the resolutions of the judge of California. That's our response to continue through that process in a federal tribunal in the United States. That's what we can do. I'm very, very sorry. What I was able to hear in some of your interventions, listening to Leopoldo saying that the intervention of our issue made him optimistic, and I heard Carlos saying the same thing about the intervention of Charlie. On the other hand, unfortunately, I am very pessimistic. I think the technological tools for this type of things are becoming more and more sophisticated. And as we are still talking about Pegasus, there is artificial intelligence involved in the surveillance to journalists and human rights defenders, when legislation is moving too slow about this, and every time we are able to detect any of these tools, there is one that is already more sophisticated. Thank you very much, Carlos. Finally, we were able to hear you at least for some minutes. Thank you very much. We need to close this panel because there is another one coming from Media Defense. We are also searching for justice for journalists around the world. We represent more than 20 journalists that were targets of Pegasus in Europe, in the face of the UN human rights supporting in Africa, Asia, and we're ready to support the initiatives that you are putting in place, which are very, very important. So we are very happy to share that space and to listen the different efforts and the braveness of all of you to move this forward, to look for justice so the journalists can continue doing their work without any problem and without being the target of any state surveillance. I thank you very much to everyone here, also online, and we continue and move forward. Thank you very much. Have a good day.